In Germany, women were granted the right to vote on the 30th of November 1918. The new act gave women and men the same right to vote from the age of 20 onwards. Universal suffrage was achieved. On the 19th of January 1919, women for the first time exercised their right to vote as a full citizen in national elections.
So the Netherlands gained general suffrage for men in 1917, and this entailed that men above the age of 25 were now all able to vote. And that same year, women gained the right to be elected for like governmental positions. And then 2 years later, in 1919, women also gained the vote on the same terms as men. So by 1919, universal suffrage was achieved for the Netherlands.
Considering that the situations in Germany and the Netherlands were quite different from the British one, this documentary discusses why it took 10 years to achieve equal franchise in the United Kingdom. After a long fight for suffrage, women were granted the partial vote in 1918 with the Representation of the People Act. This act stated that women over the age of 30 with a property qualification were allowed to vote. It was the first time that women had the vote. However, it was not on equal terms with men.
During the early 1920s, the British government was preoccupied with the issue of Home Rule for Ireland. This movement had started campaigning for the self-government of Ireland before the start of the 20th century, but it continued in the early 20th century, with notable conservative MPs such as Churchill opposing the Irish Home Rule.
So the Conservative cabinet that formed in 1924 was chiefly interested with party protectionism. They got a large majority at the 1924 election, and they definitely wanted to keep hold of that. And they thought that if they enfranchised more women, they would enfranchise the young, working class, socialist voter. And they didn't want to give the Labour Party any votes. So, in terms of William Joyson Hicks, he was the Home Secretary, and he was sympathetic to the women's cause. He understood that more women wanted the vote, and he did actually talk to the other female MPs in Parliament. Winston Churchill was definitely opposed with introducing a franchise bill. He did not want it. He produced a 15-point memorandum that he presented to the cabinet, claiming that giving more women the vote would mean a socialist victory for the Labour Party at the next general election and the end of the Conservative Party. And finally, Stanley Baldwin was the Prime Minister. He eventually came round to the idea of a female franchise bill for 1928 and helped the cabinet put it through in 1927. Successive governments had failed to introduce a franchise bill for a variety of reasons, such as governments collapsing or the lack of parliamentary time, and there were only a small number of female MPs in Parliament at the time, so it meant that they had to rely on the voices of sympathetic men to push their cause for a franchise bill. Because there was no women sat in cabinet, it meant that cabinet was able to divert their parliamentary time to other large issues in the economy, which
At a certain point, the Conservative MPs were more preoccupied with what age women should be allowed to vote, rather than extending women's voting rights. The question was whether to let women vote from the age of 25 or 21. The government finally introduced the Equal Franchise Bill in 1928. Within the Conservative Party, there were 4 female MPs. Astor, Ivier, and Philipson voted in favor of the bill, whereas Ethel was not even present.
Once they had gained the partial vote, women found that their impact on parliamentary politics could be best achieved through collective action, by forming or joining associations such as NUSEC to campaign on a wide range of issues of particular concern to them. The NUWSS, which later became NUSEC, moved from campaigning for suffrage to enabling women to make use of their new political legitimacy, for example by publishing pamphlets.
She was consistently present in different debates and divisions on private members' bills on equal franchise between 1920 and 1928, speaking and voting in favor every time, regardless of which party the bill had come from. Although Astor fully supported the non-party campaigns of organizations such as NUSEC and the Six Point Group, she was also worried that pushing too hard would damage the cause, and therefore emphasized her trust in Baldwin.
This bill shows that there were previous attempts at gaining equal franchise before 1928. Multiple private member bills were proposed during the early 1920s, but none were passed. And in this particular bill, it can be seen that Astor supported the bill, emphasizing Astor's support for equal franchise.
I think The archive is useful for these kinds of research questions because it contains such a variety of materials. So you get lots of different voices expressing different opinions, not just Nancy's. So it's the process of her developing a particular opinion or understanding of a topic. So it allows you to piece together a chronology and a timeline of the events and what the different voices were saying.
Home Rule for Ireland and the hesitation within the Conservative cabinet are two reasons why it took 10 years to achieve equal franchise in the EU. The efforts of the non-party women's organizations and MPs like Nancy Astor helped equal franchise to remain a political priority during the 1920s. In 1918, a majority female electorate was prevented. However, when in 1928 the equal franchise was achieved with women over the age of 21 being able to vote, women made up majority of the electorate. Women were now voters on the same terms as men.